Hello and welcome to Craftober Cardmaking with Waterloo Public Library, and this week we'll be talking about how to make basic cards. So first, the materials. You can see here I've got a lovely cutting mat. Cutting mats are very useful. You could also use a cutting board from your kitchen if you want. I've chosen the paper I'd like to make my card out of today, pink, and some striped cardstock and some Japanese washi paper. You'll need a ruler and some kind of cutting implement. I chose a craft knife here. You could also use an X-Acto knife or scissors if you prefer. Glue is pretty important. I've chosen a glue stick here. I've also used a hot glue gun. White glue, be careful with, but you could use it too. Writing implements, especially a good pencil and a good eraser, and then something like a black Sharpie. That's in good condition to be able to make your marks, your letters. And finally, I'm throwing in a stamp just for fun. You can add any other embellishments you have at home. So today I'm planning to make a card that has, sort of as its body, it's going to use the striped cardstock. On the inside, I'd like to have one layer of folding pink paper inset, and then another piece of pink paper and the washi paper on the cover. I mean, at this point your ideas don't need to be set in stone, but a little bit of an idea of what you want to do. So looking at how I want to inset the piece of pink paper, I can see here that the cardstock's a little long and a little big. I generally like to have my insets be about a 1/2 inch smaller than what I'm using for the outside. So here I'm measuring. You can see on the cutting board that the pink paper is 8.5 inches long, so I'm probably going to cut it at around the 9-inch mark. And the cutting board is helpful here because it gives me the dimensions and I can easily make sure everything's square. If you're just using the ruler, you may need to measure twice, one on each side of the cardstock, and then cut it once. Once you've got your ruler measured and in position, I just use the weight of the knife, sort of gently stroke along the line of the ruler. More interested in just being accurate here. After a few times, you can take that piece of scrap paper off and save it for later. So the length is now roughly about 1/2 inch shorter than the cardstock. Now we're looking at making the width of the pink paper a little shorter as well. So measuring again, the cardstock is just a little thinner than 5.5 inches. So we're going to cut just below the 5-inch mark, right there. And again, if you're just using the ruler, you're going to have to measure each edge, make a little mark, and use those to set your ruler in the right position. So now I've got my 2 pieces of paper, and the pink one fits nicely inside the cardstock. I'm going to fold the cardstock now. And to do this, I'm carefully line up the 2 corners there, make sure they're exactly stacked on top of each other. The bottom line is straight. And then I fold to the middle, and from the middle I fold outward. And then you can use your ruler. Some people use like a credit card or a library card to just sort of make that edge a little bit crisp by rubbing it with the edge of the ruler. Same thing with the paper inset. Again, line it up, fold to the middle, and then fold out from there. And use the ruler just to make it a little sharper. And now that will fold and open together like that. To make the front of the card, I'm going to use another layer of pink paper, and I'm also going to set it about a 1/2 inch smaller, make it a 1/2 inch smaller than the front of the cardstock card. So again, I'm going to measure. It's about 4.5. I think think initially I was going to do it at 3.5 to give it a larger border, but then I changed my mind. Decided I didn't want it quite that big, that small, so. So just seeing how it looks at the front of the card. Top and bottom border looks okay. Now measuring for the width. It's 5.5. I'm gonna cut it down to 5 there. Positioning it, I could always make it smaller if I like. The important thing to remember is you can always make a piece of paper smaller, but once you've cut it, you can't make it bigger again. On to the Japanese washi paper. So, getting some ideas. Do I want it on top, on the bottom? Play with your materials a bit. You can even sketch things out beforehand before you start making cards. That's also a handy tip. And then again, cutting it down to size, just making it about a 1/2 inch smaller than the pink piece of paper it will go on. I'm going to cut it in half here. Put 2 pieces on the card instead of 1. So now that I've got all the pieces of paper I'd like for the front of the card, now I'm going to start working on the lettering. The first thing we need to do is decide where we want the letters to go. So I'm going to position my paper on the pink sheet and make a line at each one, just drawing a light line here. And this is going to help me position the letters. Right now I'm working out how I want the letters positioned on the front of the card. So this is going to be a thank you card. Thank you has 8 letters. If I make each letter about 1 centimeter each, then I'll need 8 centimeters. Let's make sure I put it in the middle of the card. The card's about 12.5 inches, so 6 1/4, or 6 1/4 centimeters, I should say in this case. Find the middle line. Put a line in the middle of thank you. Line it up at the 4 centimeter mark. And then just roughly plot out where I want the letters to go. So I measured and made a box, one for each letter. And you can start doing your lettering now. At this moment though, I decided I want to put a little space between the top of the paper and the top of the letter, or the bottom of the paper and the top of the letter. So again, making use of the fact that I have a cutting mat to get just the barest 1/8 of an inch between the paper and the bottom of the letters here. And now I've got a precise box for each letter. I can sketch them out. Nothing fancy here. The sketching makes sure that the letters are evenly spaced and evenly sized. So once you've done your sketch in pencil, you take your black Sharpie. I'm just going to checking this, making sure it's a good Sharpie, a good black pen. Do what you would like with the letters here. I'm just tracing them. Now that I've got my letters in, take a look and see how things are going to look. Just like that. I think that's pretty handsome. But we'll use our good eraser to erase the lines. And this is where a good eraser is important. Maybe one that you've tested out a bit, just to be sure it really does erase. I know I've had erasers that smear the pencil all over the paper, at which point your paper's ruined and you'll have to do something else because that pencil's never coming off again. And now it's time to glue it all together. So I'm going to get my glue stick and a spare piece of paper I had on hand, just in case I needed it. I'm going to glue the Japanese washi paper onto the pink paper. And I could measure this and make little pencil marks to know exactly where to go. At this point I'm fairly confident in my my ability to eyeball where I want it to go, so I'll just take my best guess and stick it down. If you do pencil marks, you want to make sure they're going to be under the paper, because if they're just beside the paper, you might not be able to have the space to erase them. Now to get the piece of pink paper onto the card, again, I am just going to eyeball it. The pink paper is big enough, I can just glue around the back, stick it in place, and then glue the corners afterwards. And there we have the front of our card. Now it's time to go work on the inside. I've already folded the inset. Now with insets like this, it's important to glue one side of the crease or the other, but not both. I usually like to glue everything onto the back of the front of the card, so that way when you open it, that piece of paper moves with the card and opens with you. Now this would be great. I could certainly use this card to write my message. But I think I'm going to do some subtle embellishment with a stamp here. Got this lovely decal. Not quite the same style as the washi paper, but using the white ink, it's going to be so subtle, it won't matter. Now, the stamp is bigger than my ink pad, so what I've done is I put the stamp on the cutting mat, and I'm just using the ink pad to dab. And this is a great method to use so that you don't get too much ink on your stamp, and also so that the ink is distributed rather evenly. Now, really with these stamps, the best thing to do is to have a piece of plexiglass. The stamps will actually stick a little bit to the back of the plexiglass, and then you have a solid stamp. But here, I managed to make it work just fine, and you can see very, very subtle white print on there. I'm going to do another one in the other corner just to show that again. So you can see dabbing the stamp with the ink pad while it's flat. Just making sure I cover all the parts. You can see some of the ink does end up on the mat, so doing this on a scrap piece of paper would not be a bad idea. And again, just a subtle white decal there on that card. And we're done. Thank you for joining me.